Hello, hello, welcome everybody. I'm Jev. Yes, Triple V. The accent, by the way, is purely Kiwi. I read old stories for children, so we keep this a family-friendly channel by having bad word blockers, banning bots, and preventing spam. So that means new followers need to wait a few minutes before they can join in the chat. Since these stories are so old, they're now in the public domain, which means they are free to read for anyone and by anyone, the way many Christmas songs are. The digital versions I read are from Project Gutenberg, and you'll find the link for that below. The physical ones are just old books my family has lying around. Sometimes I'll even show them to you. These, by the way, are live reads. Think of them as bedtime stories rather than actual audiobooks. You get the benefits of my mistakes, distractions, explanations, and terrible attempts at accents, along with plenty of chat and interruptions as we find out about things in the story. If you need to do work or chores, then that's fine. Just come and lurk. Please adjust your volume to suit. There are captions available if you have to be quiet or you have hearing challenges, but be warned, sometimes the captions aren't always that accurate. I am a member of the Codex, an awesome group of reading streamers on Twitch. People from many walks of life who share their love of reading, and you'll find links to the Codex reading team and our Discord server below. A special feature of the Codex Discord is the security channel for those of you who stream or moderate. You'll find lots of practical, useful information to help keep your stream and your community safe. So, hang around and come discover adventure with me. You never know what we'll find. Hello everybody, I'm here. I made it. I made it up the stairs in time. So I'm just going to rearrange this because the collar is sitting weird. And yes, I do notice when it's sitting weird. Let's get the shame bottle first. Seeing it on the screen there, I thought, oh yeah, got to get that one out. Right, how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. It's still rather warm here. Not ever so slightly less than last time. It's 29.2 degrees Celsius up here, and I don't know what that is in whatever Fahrenheit. That's right, that's the other term, isn't it? C or F, Celsius or centigrade. I don't actually technically know what the difference is. I think they're probably named after different people or meanings. I don't know. And yeah, the hair is doing weird things. I don't care. It's too hot. I've got my lunch next to me. I've got a very melted croissant and plastic cheese. I thought I'd better get myself something to eat. Yeah. Didn't really do quite so well with that one. Anyway, so here we are. I hope you're all doing well. Anything unusual, interesting going on for me? Not interesting. Not technically unusual. Not wanted is probably more accurate. I had another kidney stone incident last night, but I know what it is, so therefore I'm not panicking and freaking out about it, because I know what the pain is. It woke me up at 4 o'clock this morning. So yeah, joy, oh joy. I'm dealing with another kidney stone. Yeah, found the meds for it, took one set of meds. I've got 2 different types of painkillers they've given me, and they said just take whichever one you feel like at the time. One of them, I have to also take an anti-nausea medication and an anti-constipation medication because of the way that particular painkiller, the effects that it has on people's bodies. I took that one because I've used it before years ago and had no issues with it. So I took it. I was already in pain, obviously, but it was also the middle of the night, so I didn't have food in my... I didn't think I had food in my stomach. And even with taking the anti-nausea and stuff like that, because you're in pain, your body doesn't necessarily absorb stuff quite as readily, especially if your stomach is feeling a little unsettled. Yeah, and then 5 minutes later promptly threw up. So I've spoken about that sort of thing with doctors previously, not for this particular incident, but what happens if you take a pain medication and then you throw up? Are you meant to take another one of it, or should you leave it because your body's already absorbed it or anything like that? And the advice they gave me, this is not medical advice for you, this is the advice they gave me, was that if you throw up within 10 minutes of taking something that is in a tablet form, unless it's a fast dissolving designed one, then yeah, you're safe to take another dose. So instead of taking the one that made me throw up, even though I took the anti-nausea meds, which I probably should have taken first and waited a few minutes. Now I realise that, but in the middle of the night when you're in pain and you haven't had to organise it all before, you don't think of that. You think of it as you're throwing up. You go, maybe I should have taken the anti-nausea meds first. Yeah, thank you, brain. That would have been nice to know beforehand. Anyway, so I went and took the other pain relief one, which I can take on its own, but it's one I also have to eat something with, which is why I hadn't before, because I didn't feel like eating. Because when you're in enough pain, you don't want to eat. So I had a slice of cheese. It took a while. It started to help. So I went back to bed, and yay! I woke up later on in the night because I needed to go to the loo, and I was like, wonderful, I'm not in pain. So there you go. That's the exciting stuff that's been happening here for me. Oh, joy. Oh, excitement. No, not at all. But at least I know what's going on. Yay. And also I found with the previous one, I would get some little niggles of pain later on after I knew what it was and it got past a certain stage. i.e. exiting the kidneys. Keep up your hydration. Make sure you drink more water than the standard 2 litres a day, and it will actually help, because kidneys through to expelling kidney stones is all part of the process where it's your fluid intakes and outputs that are involved. So yeah, really, really pleased that we got there. And that I have those meds at home, because I wouldn't want to be dealing with that otherwise. But really good to actually be able to recognise what the pain was. So we're going to just run a tips video, and then we shall get on with our story time. So who have we got today? I don't know. Let's welcome whoever it is. Raccoons in their habitat.
Good day. We've stumbled across the raccoons in his stream viewing habitat. Let's watch as he learns how to better enjoy the stream and make the most of his viewing experience. Let's see. According to the video, there are 6 or 7. Number 1 would appear to be hydrate. We have our hydration right here. It's important to stay hydrated. It's good mentally and physically, and it's good for your vocal cords, other parts of your body, your mind. And that brings us to number 2. When the streamer does drink, you drink as well. Oh, what's this now? Oh, drinking. Drink. Did you drink now? Oh, you can indicate so by putting the water bottle emoji or thumbs up in chat. Next one, snacks. Ah, Raccoons has snacks. There appears to be trail mix and what's that? Carrot cake. Ooh, that looks yummy. Oh, I guess we can't have any. Number 4. Is to get comfy. Well, Raccoons has his lucky blanket right here, and Raccoons also has a teddy. Who can say no to that? Don't you have a teddy? Maybe a different kind of plushie. Being comfy is good for the mind. Number 5, something to write with or write on, because you never know when you might need to look something up later. We have 2 sizes of pads right over there, 2 pens in case one has really bad ink. Good job, Raccoons. Oh, on second thought, never mind. And that brings us to our final point, which is participate in chat. You can do things like type in chat, chat with other people in chat, use commands, play Jev Bingo. Raccoons has his own Jev Bingo card right here. You can spend pages and do things like forcing Jev to wear silly things on her head like headbands, crowns, unicorn horns, and perhaps one day even something like the one that's about to appear, if I remember correctly, unless it hasn't. Did it already happen? No. Oh, and you can make clips, you can submit quotes. Just try to enjoy the stream. Ah, there's another headband. There we go. So that should do it. Enjoy the stream, and I'm going to help myself to some of that trail mix. Or not. Ah!
And welcome back. If you're wondering, if you haven't been here before, this is a cool cloth, sometimes called a chill towel. I don't know, there's a whole bunch of things like that. It's a man-made knitted fabric, probably nylon or something like that, and it's about that wide and about that long, and you get it wet, you wring it out so that it doesn't have excess water in, and then you give it a hard flick to make it do that whole, when you flick someone with a wet tea towel, that sort of thing, and it does a mass evaporation release off the surface of it, which means it automatically suddenly gets a lot colder, and then you just sit it on your skin and it gently cools you down. Now, yeah, it feels slightly damp on your skin, but honestly, when the weather is this warm, I don't care. And I'm someone who normally can't stand having damp skin. So yeah, it works. It works well. It helped to minimise my migraines when we were travelling around Europe one year. We were in a van. And we put a mattress on the floor or something, I can't remember, and we just drove around and we parked on the side of the road and we slept. But yeah, if I get too hot, I get migraines. Not nice. So things like that make a difference. Right, so we have the shame bottle handy, we have the shame bottle handy. Anytime the author shames someone and we think it's inappropriate, then call shame or type in !shame. There you go, that's an easy one. I do have a drink handy, and I've got a slightly better system for putting tape across the bottom so it doesn't slide out when I pick it up. And also, I don't panic and squeeze it to try and stop it sliding out. Iced coffee. And I'm already munching away on my lunch. Right, so we are going to read Nancy Drew, The Secret of the Old Clock, first published in 1930, and the first of the Nancy Drew books, and now in the public domain. So we are reading Chapter 6, An Unpleasant Encounter. Here we go. In spite of Nancy Drew's firm decision to assist the Horner girls, the days slipped by, and try as she would, she could think of no way to discover whether or not the missing Crowley, Will, had fallen into the hands of the Tophams. Although she seldom discussed the case with her father, he knew that she was troubled. Yeah. "You're worrying about the Horner girls," he observed one day. "I'm afraid you're taking their misfortunes too seriously. There is nothing you can do without the will, and you had best forget about it. Why, you've scarcely been out of the house since the Horner girls were here. Go shopping or anything to take your mind from the subject." Because that's how girls take their minds off the subject, is by going shopping. Well, we do still do that, but other people do too. Not girls. As in other people. "I have been thinking about Allie and Grace," and Nancy admitted with a rueful smile. "I was so sure I could do something for them." "Give your mind a rest, and perhaps you'll have an inspiration," Mr. Drew encouraged her kindly. "All right, I'll take your advice and go shopping, though I really haven't a thing to buy. The fresh air will do me some good, I suppose." After luncheon, Nancy left the house and made her way toward the business section of River Heights. That's the town she lives in. City, I think they called it. Sorry, I need to clean my glasses. They are annoying me. There's little specks of interference in the view. Yuck. Must have been something sticky on there. Just made it worse, a lot worse. Let's turn that over. It's a microfiber cloth. The texture is a little bit like suede or a chamois polishing cloth, and it's brilliant normally for getting glasses clean. I found this one works better than any of the other ones supposedly designed for cleaning glasses. And then we shall carry on, because I won't be so distracted by whatever it is that's obstructing my view. Nearly there. Yeah, I think that's it. That looks pretty good. Yay, that's definitely a lot better. Right, we'll carry on. After luncheon, Nancy left the house and made her way toward the business section of River Heights. The walk was a long one, but she took it at a brisk pace. Nancy naturally was an athletic, because, heroines in old books that they want kids to emulate, they were athletic, sporting kids. They were fit in the traditional sense of the word. And as she swung along, more than one passerby turned to look after her in admiration. Do we need to know this? Not really. After window shopping for a time, she wandered into a department store more from curiosity than because she had anything to buy. She moved about aimlessly, gazing at whatever struck her fancy. Suddenly, Nancy's attention centred upon two girls who were hurrying down the aisle ahead of her. She stopped short and stared. Though their backs were turned, she had recognised them. Ada and Isabel Topham. I'm sure I don't want to tag them around. I'll just slip down another aisle. But Nancy Drew never carried the thought into action, for at that very moment she saw Ada brush carelessly against a counter of expensive vases. As her sleeve caught, a large fragile bowl was swept to the floor. In horror, Nancy heard the crash and saw the bowl break into a dozen pieces. As Ada looked down on the wreckage, a slight flush mounted to her cheeks. Then, with a toss of her head, she started to move on. Miss, I'm afraid I must ask you to pay for the bowl, a saleswoman interposed politely. Ada wheeled angrily and stared at the saleswoman insolently. I will not pay for it, she snapped. I didn't break it. But, miss, I saw you knock it off the counter, the saleswoman protested. And, these days, if it doesn't get resolved by the customer paying for it, some stores will actually charge the floor staff for breakages. Probably they're thinking it'll induce them to stay more alert and aware and not let losses happen like that. By this time, the floor manager had arrived upon the scene, and a number of shoppers had gathered about Ada and the sales girl. Nancy likewise drew closer. This impudent girl claims I broke a vase, Ada stormed, addressing the floor manager. I wasn't even near the counter at the time. However, I did see her knock it to the floor herself. Isn't that so, Isabel? Solemnly, Isabel agreed to the untruth. The floor manager looked doubtfully from the Topham sisters to the saleswoman, because it still happens these days, but often people believe those who have money above those who are their staff. Yes, explain that one. No, don't bother. Doesn't make sense, does it? The floor manager looked doubtfully from the Topham sisters to the saleswoman. He realised that it would be a serious error to accuse well-to-do customers falsely, and for that reason he was inclined to give the Topham girls the benefit of the doubt. He stooped over and examined the fragments of the bowl. Someone must pay for the damage, he said severely. This is an expensive imported bowl. Then let your clerk pay for it out of her salary, Ada retorted. If she hadn't been so stupid, she wouldn't have broken the vase. The saleswoman was too bewildered to take her own part, and Nancy saw that the floor manager was in a dilemma. As she sensed that he was about to exonerate Ada from all blame, she stepped forward. You must be mistaken, Miss Topham, she said quietly. I am certain the saleswoman did not break the bowl, for I saw the accident myself. What business have you to interfere? Ada demanded harshly, wheeling upon Nancy. Perhaps it isn't my business, but I can't permit you to accuse this girl of something she didn't do. You saw the accident, miss? The floor manager questioned. Yes, as Miss Topham walked by the counter, her sleeve caught on the vase. It isn't true, Ada snapped. But I'm tired of this silly argument. How much do you want for your vase? The floor manager studied the price list. $50. Wow, it's an expensive imported vase indeed. What? Ada fairly screamed. You want $50 for that old bowl? I'll never pay for it. The vase was imported from Italy, miss, and I'm afraid you must pay the price asked. Do you know who I am? Ada inquired loftily.
I think everyone in the city knows about the Richard Tophams, the floor manager returned wearily. My father owns... He doesn't own the store, the man interrupted with growing impatience. If you refuse to pay for the vase, I shall be forced to turn you over to the authorities. You wouldn't dare, Ada gasped. Never in all my life have I been insulted like this. Isabel, who was slightly more reasonable than her sister, now held a whispered conference with Ada. All right, I'll pay for the bowl, Ada decided as she took out her checkbook. But let me warn you, the matter won't be dropped here. She turned upon Nancy Drew and eyed her coldly. I'm not through with you either, young lady. You'll pay for this outrage. Nancy made no reply, but continued to smile pleasantly, an act which further enraged the Topham sisters. Hastily settling for the damage Ada had done, they sailed grandly out of the store. Gratefully, the saleswoman thanked Nancy. You don't know how I appreciated the way you took my part. I couldn't have paid for the bowl, and if you hadn't said what you did, the floor manager probably would have discharged me. I saw her break the bowl, and I was determined to see justice done. So this is setting the character of Nancy Drew, because don't forget, this is the first Nancy Drew book. None of the kids have read this book before. Now, none of the kids who are the original readers have actually met Nancy Drew before. So this whole book, yes, it's the adventures, it's the mysteries, but it's also setting the character and the world that they live in. I was determined to see justice done. There is my name and address if you need it, and Nancy handed the woman her card. I'm afraid you have made enemies by taking my part. Nancy shrugged her shoulders indifferently. It really doesn't matter. The Topham girls were never my friends, but they may try to get even with you. They're very spiteful. Let them try, Nancy smiled. However, I don't believe there's any need to worry. Their talk is mostly bluff. Yeah, we'll see about that one this time. Lightly, Nancy dismissed the subject, and as she found she was being regarded with curiosity and admiration by those who had witnessed the scene, left the store. She walked slowly toward the park. It makes my blood fairly boil every time I think of Ada and Isabel Topham getting all of the Crowley fortune, she told herself with feeling, especially when Grace and Allie Horner need the money so badly. The way Ada tried to accuse the shop girl was disgusting. Nancy crossed the public park and paused for a moment at the drinking fountain. As she glanced up, she saw that unwittingly she had selected the path Isabel and Ada Topham had taken. Upon leaving the department store, they too had gone to the park and were now seated upon a bench, engaged in earnest conversation. Their heads were close together, and from the expression on their faces, Nancy suspected that they were discussing her. Unless she retraced her steps, it would be necessary to pass directly in front of them. If they see me, they are certain to say something mean, Nancy thought, and if they do, I'll be sure to lose my temper. I know, she decided impulsively. I'll take the path through the bushes and avoid them. I can pass behind that bench and they'll never notice me. Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. What was this chapter called, actually? No, let's not worry about that. Ada and Isabel were so engrossed in their conversation that they failed to notice Nancy's approach. Chuckling to herself, Nancy left the sidewalk and quietly made her way down the path, which was shaded with overhanging bushes. She had no intention of attempting to overhear what the Topham sisters were saying, but as she noiselessly approached the bench where they were sitting, 2 words reached her ears, causing her to pause involuntarily. Ada was speaking, and the phrase which Nancy had accidentally overheard was, "the will." In a flash, her suspicions were aroused. She comprehended the significance of the phrase. We are educating our young readers that they needed to pay attention to this sort of information in these books. It must be Josiah Crowley's will they're talking about, she reasoned. Perhaps they know something about the missing will. They may reveal what became of it. With the instinct of a detective, Nancy Drew crept cautiously closer. The bushes were thick, and by crouching low behind the bench, she was able to hear without being seen. Oh, if only she might learn something which would prove that the Tophams had deprived the Horner girls of their inheritance. And that's the last page of the chapter. I'm just going to have a mouthful of my lunch, and then we shall carry on. And what did you have for your lunch today? Was it anything particularly yummy? I hope so. Also a mouthful of iced coffee. Right, and we'll carry on. Chapter 7, Nancy Turns Sleuth. While Nancy Drew eagerly waited, scarcely daring to breathe naturally lest her presence be detective, Ada began to speak. "Well, if there should happen to be another will, we may be dumped," she said sourly. "I don't believe Josiah Crowley ever made such a will," Isabel replied in so low a tone that Nancy scarcely caught the words. "Evidently Nancy Drew does, or she wouldn't be taking such an interest in those Horner girls," Ada returned. "I know she had them at her house last week because I was passing and saw them go in. How I hate that girl. If she should get her father interested, he might dig up another will. Even if another will does turn up, we can trust Dad to take care of it," Isabel commented dryly. "Ooh. You mean he would—" "Never mind what I mean," Isabel insinuated darkly. "Mother and Dad wouldn't be simple enough to let that money get away from us. It's ours by right, anyhow. Didn't Josiah Crowley live on us?" "Yes, we ought to have all the money after enduring him for nearly 3 years. Just the same, I don't like the way Nancy Drew has taken up with the Horner girls. She always did have a way of nosing into things she had no business to find out." "Oh, pooh for her," Isabel scoffed. "Let her try to discover anything she likes. The money was given to us fairly enough." The conversation ended abruptly as Isabel and Ada rose from the bench and walked on down the street. Phew, she didn't get discovered. Nancy waited until they were out of sight and then emerged from the bushes. There may be a chance to find that missing will after all, she reasoned, as she sank down on the bench vacated by Isabel and Ada. Nancy had always been convinced that Josiah Crowley had made a second will. However, since her talk with the Horner girls, she had shared her father's opinion that the document had fallen into the hands of the Tophams, only to be destroyed. This conviction had discouraged her. That's why she was really not knowing what to do about it. Now the information which she had gleaned from the snatch of overheard conversation gave her new hope. From what Isabel and Ada had said, she was led to believe that if Josiah Crowley had made a second will, the Tophams were as ignorant as herself concerning its whereabouts. Anyway, it's encouraging to know the will hasn't been destroyed, Nancy told herself. But there's one thing certain, if the Tophams ever get their hands on it, they'll take care it never comes to light. From what Isabel and Ada said, I judge they're beginning to realise their position is anything but secure. If I'm ever to find that will, I must get busy before they beat me to it. Nancy Drew possessed her father's liking for a mystery, and she delighted in a battle of wits when championing a worthy cause. Carson Drew had often remarked that he enjoyed the detective work of his cases better than the court work, but Nancy knew that he was too busy with his own cases to devote much attention to the missing Crowley will. If anything were done to help the Horner girls win their inheritance, she must accomplish it herself. So this is where she decides she is going to be the detective, instead of just theoretically liking the idea. As Nancy reviewed the facts of the case, it seemed to her that she must have overlooked a possible clue. Never had a mystery appeared more baffling. For nearly 10 minutes, Nancy sat lost in deep thought. Then, with a cry of delight, she sprang to her feet. How stupid of me not to think of it before. The Horner girls aren't the only ones who should have figured in the will. There were a number of relatives, and Father said that they filed a claim too. I wonder who they are. If I could talk with them, it's possible I might learn something that would have a bearing on the case. Convinced that the inspiration was a happy one, she set off toward her father's office. He was engaged in an important conference when she arrived, and Nancy was forced to wait 10 minutes before she was admitted to the inner office. "Now what?" her father asked, smiling as she burst in upon him. "Is it a new dress you want?" Nancy's cheeks were flushed and her eyes danced with excitement. "Don't try to tease me," she protested. "I've stumbled onto something important and I want information." "At your service, Nancy," Mr. Drew said. "But if it's about that Crowley case, I've told you everything I know." "Excuse me, very itchy suddenly. I think that's it." Nancy poured out the story of her encounter with the Topham sisters in the department store and told of the conversation she had overheard in the public park. Mr. Drew listened with interest until she had finished. Now what is it you want?" he asked gravely. "I thought if I went to those other relatives I might be able to learn something which may help solve the mystery." "A good idea, Nancy. But I don't know their names, and that's why I came to you. I wish I could help you, but I'm afraid I can't," Mr. Drew said regretfully. Nancy's face fell. "Wait a minute," he called as she turned to leave. "I can't supply the names you want, but I think I can tell you where to find them." "Where?" "At the courthouse. They should be on file." He glanced at his watch and frowned. "But I'm afraid it's too late to go there this afternoon." "Oh, and I'm anxious to find it right away," Nancy declared in disappointment. "If I delay even a single day, the Tophams may get ahead of me and find that will." Suddenly her face brightened as she thought of something. "I know, I'll jump into the roadster and run out and have a talk with the Horner girls. They should be able to furnish me the information." "You can try them at least," said Mr. Drew. "Sorry, it's an itchy day." Often, if I've been dealing with extra pain, like last night it was kidney stone, but usually it's more likely to be a headache, a normal headache, or a migraine. But I have noticed that when I've been dealing with extra pain, I usually have a lot more of the itches. The nerves have been turned up louder than normal, sort of thing. Come on, where's the other end of this? Let's get this back on, keeping me nice and cool. How do you keep cool when it's warm weather where you are? Do you have air conditioning? We don't. That's why I do things like open up the skylights and things like that. But different people have different ways of keeping cool. "You can try them at least," he said. "That's just what I'll do," Nancy decided as she turned again toward the door. "Just a minute," Carson Drew stopped her. "I wonder if you realise just what you are getting into, Nancy." "Why? What do you mean?" "Only this. Detective work isn't always the safest occupation in which to engage. I happen to know that Richard Topham is an unpleasant man when crossed. If you actually succeed in learning anything which may help the Horner girls, you are certain to have the Tophams in your wool." I think that means messing around in your business, getting you into trouble, or being a nuisance or something. "I'm not afraid of them, Father." "Good," Mr. Drew exclaimed. "I was hoping you would say that. I'm glad you have the courage of your convictions, but I didn't want you to march off into battle without a knowledge of what undoubtedly you will be up against." Well, we don't actually know what Mr. Topham's capable of, actually. "Battle?" "Yes, battle. Rest assured the Tophams won't give up the fortune without a bitter struggle. However, if they attempt to make serious trouble, I promise to deal with them myself. I only wish I had the time to help you find the will. And if I find it, I'll take the matter into court." "Oh, thank you. There's no one like you in all the world." Nancy moved toward the door. "I may not get back until rather late," she threw back over her shoulder. She said over her shoulder as she went out. "I have a feeling I may discover a real clue today, and if I do, I'm going to trail it down." With characteristic impetuosity, she darted from the room, permitting the office door to bang behind her. Chapter 8. A Discouraging Day. I'm guessing that means she didn't find out anything useful. After leaving her father's office, Nancy Drew went directly home. Quickly backing her roadster from the garage, she set off down the river road in the direction of the old farmhouse where the Horner girls lived. Before leaving the main highway, Nancy glanced anxiously at the sky and was relieved that no clouds were visible. "After my last experience, I don't intend to get caught in another storm," she admonished herself. The recent rain had made the roads rough, and Nancy bumped about in the roadster rather uncomfortably. At last, however, she came within sight of the farmhouse, and as she viewed it from a distance, noted that it was even older and more run down than she had thought. The house was large and rambling, but apparently it had not been painted for years. Shingles were falling from the roof, and the porches sagged. As Nancy's eyes travelled to the old barn, she wondered how it had managed to survive the recent storm. If Allie and Grace Horner only had money, they could make the place attractive, she thought, as she drove in at the open gate. Squawking chickens fled before her as she stopped the roadster in the barnyard and switched off the engine. Springing lightly from the car, she ran up the walk toward the house. She paused at the kitchen door and rapped. Receiving no response, she went around to the front of the house and knocked on another door. There was no answer, nor did a tour of the yard reveal either of the Horner girls. Disappointment took possession of Nancy. She had driven nearly 15 miles only to find no one at home. "I'm defeated at every turn," she thought disconsolately, as she slowly walked back to the roadster. "It's certainly discouraging." "Hello there," a voice called. "Were you looking for us?" The shouted greeting reached Nancy as she prepared to step into the roadster. Step into. Step is a weird word that gets used on a regular basis. It's a normal word, but it gets used weirdly on a regular basis. Stepped across the room draws attention to the way the legs are being moved. I have heard the phrase stepped across the room, stepped inside, and it's like you're watching a deer that is unused to this situation, just cautiously stepping in. Walked, climbed, got into, that sort of thing. So stepped into the car, that implies you're going from this level on the ground to this level in the car. That's a weird shaped car. It's not that there's anything wrong with the word, it's just the older usage. Actually, I've seen it in newer books too. That particular style of usage seems disjointed and it draws attention to itself instead of becoming neutral. When you were at school, were you told at the younger stages when you were first starting to write stories and stuff, don't use the word said all the time? And so it was like you'd discovered a thesaurus. Declared, exclaimed, or shouted, whatever, anything but said. The reality is true authors, good authors, use the word said a lot because we don't hear the word said anymore. It tells us what's happening, but we don't notice it. It doesn't feel overused because it becomes invisible. Unlike stepped has not got to that stage of invisibility. So yeah, sorry. It always pulls me out of immersion in a story when they use the word stepped, unless it's actually there is meant to be a focus on someone moving their feet from this place to that place, and it's like you're being told to look at their feet or their legs, the way they're moving. Yeah, distracting. That's why I think it's a silly word to use in that sort of context. She got into the car. They've probably been told they're not allowed to use the word got. Used to be considered not rude, not coarse, uncultured, I guess. Something like that. I don't understand. Edgy. Something that was considered to be not a good word to use. Rough. That sort of thing. I don't know. Anyway, hi Coleslaw, great to have you here too, by the way. We'll carry on. She stepped into the car. You won't be able to unsee that anymore, I can tell you now. Now I need to find where I got to. As she prepared to step into the roadster, one foot on the running board, she turned her head and saw the Horner girls hurrying toward her from the direction of the barn. Allie did not wait for her sister to open the barnyard gate, but swinging easily over it, ran to meet Nancy. "We saw you just as you were leaving the house," she cried enthusiastically. "We wouldn't have missed you for anything." "We were picking berries in the woods," Grace explained as she hurried up, slightly out of breath. Proudly, she displayed a tin pail which was filled nearly to the brim with raspberries. "But look at our arms," Allie laughed ruefully as she glanced down at the ugly scratches which had been caused by brambles and sharp thorns. "You must come into the house and have a dish of berries, Nancy," Grace urged hospitably. "They're good with sugar and cream." "If you don't have them too often," Allie added. "I can stop a minute," Nancy declared as the three entered the house. "I came to talk about the will." "Oh, then you have good news for us?" Allie asked hopefully. "Are we really going to get some of the money?" "I don't know yet," Nancy was forced to admit. "So far I haven't been able to learn a thing about the missing will." Allie's face fell, but she tried to hide her disappointment. "We need the money so badly," she said with an apologetic smile. "Grace hasn't had a new dress in 3 years. She makes all of our clothing out of old things we happen to have in the house. If our luck doesn't change soon, I'm afraid we'll be mistaken for rag pickers." "We really didn't expect much of Uncle Josiah's money," Grace broke in quickly, at least lest Nancy misinterpret her sister's remarks. "We weren't related, you know." "Well, you can hardly say the Tophams were, for that matter," Allie declared. "They were 3rd or 4th cousins." "We can get along without the money," Grace said quietly. "We manage very well when I have plenty of work. We're a little discouraged right now because dressmaking has fallen off. It's a slack season. I guess people would rather go to the store and buy a dress ready-made. We're not used to this style of how it used to be, where stuff was all made for you. People used to either make their own clothes or they would commission somebody else to, and that was normal before the days of factories where things were ready-made. Yeah, tailoring, indeed. Dressmaking, tailoring. I wouldn't," Nancy declared impulsively. "Grace, I'd like to engage you to make me a dress. Will you do it? I'll pay you well." Well, Dad was expecting her to be buying a dress, so why not commission one to be made for her? Tears of joy came into Grace's eyes. "Will I? Oh, you don't know how grateful I am for the work." "Oh, will you do it? Will I? I haven't had anything to do for nearly 3 months. I don't mind poverty so much for myself, but for Allie," her voice broke, "I promised Mother I'd look after her." Allie sprang from her chair and rushed to her sister. She flung her arms affectionately about her. "Oh, Grace, I shouldn't have said what I did about needing money. I didn't mean it. Truly I didn't. But it's the truth. We'll get along, Grace, if only my chicken money came in faster. Why can't a hen lay more than 1 egg a day?" Grace smiled faintly at Allie's feeble attempt at a joke, and to break an awkward silence, Nancy took up the conversation. "It makes me wonder why she didn't do that earlier or buy eggs until she was prompted to," says Coleslaw. "I know. I think it's just that it never occurred to her that she could do that. She doesn't see herself as particularly well off, like not rich, like the Topham girls act. But she also hasn't realised how much she takes for granted what she does have. The girls are actually helping her to see how well off she is, but she hasn't yet developed that thinking where you realise that you can actually help out by these are the things that they do. And no, it's not giving charity. You're actually paying someone to do that work, or you're buying a product that they provide. And she's, I think, in the process of learning that one. And also the author's probably thinking, here's an opportunity to help kids to realise this themselves. Book one, right. Yeah, absolutely. Setting the scenes for everything, not just for this one story. Book one always has to carry a lot. Oh, by the way, if you ever come across a book series that's not deeply embedded in progress through the series and it's new to you, but you know there are other books in the series where it's the same characters in it, there may be some things that it would be better to know from the beginning, from the first book, but it's not essential. Often it's, especially if it's the first series the author has done, often it's better to start with the second book, not the first book in the series, because the author has already got that all off their chest, all of the new stuff that they need to do. It's not that you don't need the information, it's more that if it's the first book that they've written and it's the first book in a series, often they over-explain everything. If you already know the characters and stuff, you already have bought into this whole idea, and so therefore it's easier to overlook the fact that they are over-explaining in the first book and things like that. Prime example for me was I read one of Jasper Ford's Thursday books. Thursday is Jasper Fforde has a fantasy series that is set in books in the world of fiction, and so Thursday next is this character who lives in the real world and ends up going into the book world to solve something. I came across the second book in the series at the library and it was intriguing, and it didn't say that you had to have read the first one or anything like this. Got it out, thoroughly enjoyed it, and then I got the first one and read that. Now, because I'd thoroughly enjoyed the second one, and actually you didn't super need to have read the first one to get it, but because I'd already enjoyed it and got to know the people, I was a lot more generous and forgiving of the overwriting he did in the first book. Whereas if I'd started with the first book, I would have got bogged down in all the exposition. But when you've already bought into it, it's a lot easier to gloss over it. You read it, yes, but you don't get so bogged down because you're discovering a whole new thing. So my big tip is, if it's not a series that has to be built one book upon another, start with the second book in the series, because by then the writer has got their stuff sorted and they know where they're going with how they write. Hardy Boys and Nancy are okay with that too. Yeah, the whole style of the way the Stratemeyer Syndicate books are written works much better than most other series books for something that was fairly early on in series writing, because they drop you in media res. They drop you in the middle of the action right from the beginning of the story. I think there was one of the ones that we read early on. No, there were two. The one with the boys going off to school didn't do that, but that was, I think, the very first of the Edward Stratemeyer books, and so he hadn't learnt that then. And then there was one of the Tom Swift ones. It wasn't so much that he over-explained things as Tom was a little bit daft, to put it kindly. And I love the Tom Swift books, but he was just so, oh my goodness, why would you do that? All the time. And they ironed that one out, because we didn't have anywhere near the same level of that happening with the subsequent books that we've read since then. So yeah, big tip, start with the second book in a series and then go back to the first, like a prequel, to find out a little bit more about it. And you'll find that you will discover more series that way. So often people will come across a book, decide, oh look, since it's part of a series, I won't start with any of them until I've got access to the first one, and then I'll read that. And then they're so disappointed because the author is still learning how to author, learning how to write, learning how to cut out the dross, cut out not just dross, but anything unessential. So yeah. So there you go. That's Hardy Boys weren't building anything game-changing like that. Yes, that's true. Tom Swift was a bit different through the first few to set the stage, since he's an inventor. Yeah. So there you go. free tips. Free reading tips. Right, we'll carry on. So yeah, we are developing the character in the world and the personality and the characteristics, but not as overwhelmingly over-explained as so many modern new authors do. Like people who've started off with something like the National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo, which doesn't exist anymore, because they take an idea, it's their first real venture into it, they write the 50,000 words, they're so excited that they achieved that, they then have to sit down and edit it all into a real book. And because it's their first attempt at it, they overdo everything instead of just gently hinting and touching on things along the way and letting people's own imaginations take them places. So let's carry on, shall we? I'm not very good at doing it with words, with spoken words. Grace smiled faintly at Ali's feeble attempt at a joke, and to break an awkward silence, Nancy took up the conversation. I'll bring the dress material with me the next time I come this way. She did not need a new dress, but she realised that there was no other way to help the Horner girls, for they were too proud to accept money. Fair enough. And now I want to ask you a few more questions about Josiah Crowley, Nancy told them. Do you know whether he ever visited other relatives beside the Tophams? Oh, yes, Ali returned promptly. He was only distantly related to the Tophams, you know. They were third cousins, I believe. He had a number of other relatives whom he frequently visited. Before he went to live with the Tophams, they took turns keeping him, Grace informed her. Can you tell me the names of these relatives? Let me see. Would they be too proud if you bought them a chicken? Probably not. Probably not. If you needed a chicken or if you needed eggs and you bought them off them, you girls are living out in the country and you raise eggs and your eggs are probably nicer than the ones that my housekeeper, my cook, can get from the store. We don't know where those ones have come from. So what about I buy my eggs fresh from you when I come and visit you? They'll be fresher. They've been pecking around in the woods out behind the house and things like that. So they'll be eating things that they like eating. That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Just every time I come out, I'll get a dozen eggs. Why not? And because she decides what they're eating. She does all the planning for that, and then the cook housekeeper does the actual work. She's been managing the household for a long time, so she could make those decisions to do things like, well, if you've got any chickens that you're getting rid of and they're ones that can be eaten, as in cooked and eaten. Why do I need to say that? I didn't need to say that. Don't slaughter a chicken that's still laying lots of eggs. But if you've got chickens that have got past the prime for doing that and you're wanting to get rid of them rather than paying to contribute a little bit of extra food to them so they do lay well, then yeah, I'll take the chicken off your hands. Why not? Sort of thing. She should be. Because she can make those decisions. She's the one who's in charge of their household. Yeah, anyway, let's carry on. Can you tell me the name of these relatives? She said. Let me see. Grace lost herself in thought. There are 2 cousins living in Masonville, Matilda and Edna Turner. Ali prompted her. They're regular old maids, but awfully nice. They were wonderful to Uncle Josiah when he was alive. And there were 2 nephews, Grace went on, William and Fred Matthews, with 1 T in Matthews. Unusual. They have a farm on the same river road. Everyone thought they would get something. How far do they live from here? Nancy inquired. Oh, not more than 5 miles. You could drive there in a few minutes. It's on the way to Masonville. Sorry, there's a fly bothering me. Then I'll be able to make the 2 calls on the same trip, Nancy announced as she arose to depart. Let's wait and see if there is anyone else yet. Obviously, the author thinks that we've got enough information. I must hurry along now, or it will be too late for me to stop there this afternoon. I'm hoping that by talking with the relatives I may learn something which will help us to trace the missing will. I'm afraid there's not much chance we'll ever get anything, Grace said rather morosely. The Tophams will never let the money slip out of their hands. If we find the will, they won't be able to keep the money, Nancy declared. Father will see to it that you girls get your just due. Oh, Grace, we forgot to tell Nancy about Abigail Rowan, Allie reminded her sister. She'd be apt to know more about the will than anyone else. That's right. You really should call on her, Nancy. She took care of Uncle Josiah one time when he was sick, and he thought the world of her. He often declared he intended to leave her something. Even a few $100s would have meant so much to her, Allie added. Abigail's old and feeble now. She must be more than 70 years of age, and there's no one to look after her. Where shall I find her? Nancy asked quickly. She lives over on the Westlake Road, Grace responded. It's a good many miles from here. You could make inquiry at some time of the farmhouses along the road. I don't have time to go there today, but I'll surely call upon her as soon as I can. I have a feeling that this particular person is going to be more significant to the story than the others. But I'll surely call upon her as soon as I can, and now I must be going or it'll be dark long before I get back to River Heights. Nancy said goodbye hastily. The Horner girls accompanied her to the roadster and watched her drive away. As she looked back from the corner, they waved their handkerchiefs. We just wave these days. We don't wave handkerchiefs. Plucky girls, Nancy thought. Up until today, I didn't realise how terribly they need help. I simply must find a way to help them. She drove along the river road, heading in the direction of Masonville. I wave Pippins at the moment. Yeah, you hold up the cat and you go like this for the cat's paw. She drove along the river road, heading in the direction of Masonville. Although it was growing late, Nancy was determined to visit the Matthews brothers and, if possible, Matilda and Edna Turner. After she'd gone perhaps 5 miles, she began to watch the mailboxes and presently noticed one which bore the name Matthews. The farmhouse was set back a short distance from the road, and Nancy drove the roadster down a narrow lane which led to it. As she stopped the car, a man came out of the house and regarded her questioningly. Learning that the farmer was William Matthews, Nancy quickly explained her mission. At first the man was inclined to distrust her, but after he had made certain that she was not a friend of the Richard Topham family, he talked frankly of Josiah Crowley and told all that he knew concerning the will. My brother and I have filed a complaint with the proper authorities at the courthouse, he explained. We feel certain there must have been another will because Uncle Josiah always said that he intended to leave us something. Did you actually see the will? Nancy questioned hopefully. The farmer shook his head. No, my brother and I haven't the proof that he ever made a second will, but we do know that he never had any particular love for the Tophams. He felt that they took him in only because they were after his money, and I guess he wasn't wrong at that. Anyway, I am certain that he had made up his mind to cut them out without a cent. Perhaps he neglected to write the second will. That wouldn't be like Uncle Josiah. He was rather queer about little things, but he was always particular in attending to business matters. No, I'm more apt to think he made the will and hid it somewhere. Hid. Key word. You have no idea where he could have concealed it? Not the slightest, miss. My brother and I will be glad to offer a substantial reward to anyone who can produce it. Nancy asked a number of other questions, but the farmer was unable to furnish information which was of any value. Disappointed, she thanked the man for his trouble and continued on her way to Masonville. Rumour, she sighed. That's all I hear. At my next stop, I hope I'll acquire a few facts. Upon reaching Masonville, Nancy made inquiry and was directed to the home of the Turner sisters. Made inquiry. Who do you ask? That sort of question of, is it really that small a town? I don't know. They lived alone, city. I think they defined cities quite differently back then. They lived alone at the outskirts of the city. Although not in poverty, they did not have any more money than they needed. Nancy found them at home, and when they learned the purpose of her visit, they greeted her cordially. They were very pleasant ladies, and she spent nearly an hour at their home. So much for getting back to River Heights early. Yeah, that's Theo for you. She spent nearly an hour at their home, but although they answered her questions willingly, she learned nothing which had a direct bearing on the missing will. But don't just listen for that information. You might hear something that is going to just add extra layers to what you need to know. Matilda and Edna Turner, two very old-fashioned names, insisted that Josiah Crowley had intended to disinherit the Tophams, but they had no idea what could have become of the latter will. They had been led to expect a small inheritance and were disappointed that everything was to go to the Tophams. "Why don't you talk with Abigail Rowan?" Matilda suggested at the conclusion of the interview. "She took care of Josiah once when he was sick, and he thought a lot of her. She knew more about his odd ways than any other living person." "I don't believe it would do a particle of good," Edna interposed. "Abigail is getting along in years, and her memory isn't what it used to be." It was after dark when at last Nancy took leave of the Turner sisters and headed her roadster toward home. She was tired and hungry as well as discouraged. At least this time she doesn't actually have to go back by a river road. She can actually use the more main road. "So far I've only wasted my time," she thought despondently. "I'm no closer to finding the will than I ever was, and I'm sure there is one. I've often heard Father say that no real mystery is solved without a lot of hard work, and I'm ready to believe it." With the exception of Abigail Rowan, Nancy had called upon all of the Crowley relatives. From what the Turner sisters had told her, she was doubtful that a visit to her cottage would be worthwhile. "Oh, well, I suppose I may as well go there tomorrow," Nancy decided, after a mental debate. "She's my last hope. If I fail there, I'll be forced to give up." Chapter 9. Vital information, but we're going to have a drink of water first. Which means you're going to have a drink of water too. And I want to see those thumbs up, or the water emotes. That's better. Right. Chapter 9, Vital Information. Yay! Thank you, Goriki. Good to see that. "This must be the house. It certainly fits the description given to me." Sorry, American. "It certainly fits the description given me." As she spoke, Nancy Drew paused before a square, one-story frame building. That means it's timber building that's got... Anyway, it's the way it's built, as opposed to stone or brick, which stood dejectedly in the centre of a yard overgrown with weeds and dandelions. So it's an elderly person who isn't able to care for the grounds anymore. The cottage was sadly in need of paint, and pickets were missing from the sagging fence which enclosed it. A boardwalk which led to the front porch had begun to rot away and offered treacherous footing. The place looks deserted, but I'm sure Abigail Rowan must live here," Nancy assured herself as she made her way up the walk, gingerly avoiding loose boards which threatened to fly up at her. Early that morning she had left River Heights in her final quest for information concerning the Crowley will. Nancy did not know exactly where Abigail Rowan lived, but she had taken the Westlake Road and had made inquiry along the way. Neighbours had assured her that she could not miss the place, as it was the most run-down house along the road. "If Abigail can't help me, I'm at the end of my string," Nancy thought as she rapped on the front door. So we know what's going to happen. She'll say something which will help her. She'll initially think it doesn't help. Or she'll go, "Oh, I know exactly what to do." One or the other. Which one's it going to be? Nancy thought as she rapped on the front door. There was no response to her knock, and she rapped a second time. She was about to turn away in disappointment when a slight noise within the house attracted her attention. She was certain her rap had been heard. "Who's there?" "Why, she's been dead the past 30 years. "Who's there?" a muffled voice called. "If you're a peddler, I don't want anything." "I'm not a peddler," Nancy called out reassuringly. "Won't you let me in, please?" There was a long silence, and then the quavering voice replied, "I can't open the door. I've hurt myself and can't walk." Nancy hesitated an instant, then pushed open the door, because people back then didn't lock their doors. As she stepped into the dreary living room, she saw the pitiful figure on the couch. Abigail Rowan lay huddled under a ragged old shawl, her withered face drawn with pain. "I'm Nancy Drew, and I've come to help you, Miss Rowan." At the words, the old lady turned her head and regarded Nancy with a stare which was almost childlike. "You've come to help me?" she repeated unbelievingly. "I didn't think anyone would ever trouble themselves about old Abigail again. Here, let me arrange the pillows for you." Gently, Nancy moved the old woman into a more comfortable position. "Yesterday I fell down the cellar stairs," Abigail explained. "I hurt my hip and sprained my ankle. I can't take a step without it nearly killing me." Just as well she didn't break her hip. That's more common. "Haven't you had a doctor?" Nancy asked in astonishment. "There ain't been a soul come near me," Abigail sighed. "I've just laid here on my bed and wondered how soon the end would come. I'm getting along in years now, and it won't be long." "Nonsense," Nancy protested briskly, for she saw that the old lady's trouble had made her morose. "You have a good many years yet before you. Can you walk at all? Are you certain your hip isn't broken?" "I can walk a little, but it hurts something awful when I do." "Then your hip isn't broken," Nancy said in relief. "Let's see your ankle. Why, you don't even have it wrapped up. Where are the bandages? I'll fix it for you." "There's a white rag in the closet in the kitchen," Abigail told her. Nancy shook her head sternly. "A rag won't do. You have a bad sprain and it must be taken care of properly. You really should have a doctor." "I can't afford it," Abigail murmured. "Let me pay for it," Nancy begged. Abigail shook her head stubbornly. "I'll not take charity. I'd rather die in my bed." "Well, if you're set on not having a doctor, I'm going to the nearest drugstore and get bandages and a number of other things," Nancy insisted. "But before I go, I'll make you a cup of tea." "There ain't any tea in the house." "Then I'll get some. What else do you need?" "I need most everything, but I can't afford to pay for it. You might get me some tea and a loaf of bread. That's enough. You'll find the money in a jar in the cupboard. It's not very much, but it's all I have." "I'll be back in a few minutes," Nancy promised. She stopped in the kitchen long enough to examine the cupboards. As she had suspected, they were practically empty. With the exception of a little flour and sugar and a cheap can of soup, there appeared to be nothing in the house to eat. Nancy discovered the money jar, but an investigation revealed that it contained less than $5. Yeah. As used to be a lot more common, but still is in places where it shouldn't be, a lot of elderly starve to death or have accidents because they're not as with it as they should be, because they're not eating well anymore because they can't afford to, and so they fall and have an accident and then die from that. Yeah, not as uncommon as we would like to think it is. It's probably every cent poor Abigail has in the world, she thought. Nancy did not take any money from the jar, but quietly slipped out the back door. Hurrying to the roadster which she had left at the roadside, she drove to the nearest store and ordered nearly $10 worth of groceries. She wished that she might take a doctor back with her, but she realized that Abigail was set in her ways and would not accept the service, since she could not pay for it. Before she returned to the cottage, Nancy stopped at the drugstore and purchased bandages and liniments. That's like healing ointments, but usually it's because they've got different oils and stuff like that in it, which will actually help with the process. And a liniment is often put on something. It's like a muscle rub, that sort of thing, as a type of liniment. You rub that on and then you wrap up the joint with it, and it helps to promote the healing. That was a common usage of the word liniment. I don't know if it actually means that or not. That's just how I know it to be used. She carried the supplies into the house and quickly set about making Abigail more comfortable. She bathed the swollen ankle and bound it neatly with clean bandage. "It feels better already," Abigail told her gratefully. "I don't know what I'd have done if you hadn't come when you did." As soon as she had attended the woman's immediate needs, Nancy built a fire in the kitchen range and put on the tea kettle. While she was waiting for the water to boil, she raised the drawn shades and permitted the warm sunshine to flood into the room. While she did this, she told Abigail Rowan something about herself. After the tea had steeped, that means sat, and the hot water has soaked into the tea leaves, developing the flavour of the drink. After the tea had steeped, she poured Abigail a cup and urged her to eat the nourishing meal she had prepared. She was gratified to observe that almost immediately the old woman became more cheerful and seemed to gain strength. She sat up on the couch and appeared eager to talk with Nancy. "There ain't many folks that are willing to help an old woman. If Josiah Crowley had lived, things would have been different," she declared. "It's strange that he didn't provide for you in his will," Nancy replied quietly. She did not wish to excite the old woman by telling her real mission, and yet she was eager to find out what Abigail knew about the missing will. She hoped that she might lead her tactfully into a discussion of Josiah Crowley's affairs without raising hope which might never be realised. "It's my opinion that Josiah did provide for me," Miss Rowan returned impressively. "Many a time he said to me, 'Abigail, you'll never need to worry. When I'm gone, you'll be well taken care of by my will.' And then everything was left to the Tophams," Nancy encouraged her to proceed. "That was according to the first will. But there was another one. I don't know what became of it." "Are you sure there was another will?" Nancy inquired, almost too eagerly, but Abigail looked at her rather sharply. "Course I am, but I'm as sure of it as I am that I'm sitting here. Why, I saw that will with my own eyes." "You saw it?" Nancy gasped. The old woman nodded gravely. "Mind, I didn't see what was in the will. One day Josiah came in when I was sitting in my rocking chair, and right off I noticed he had a piece of paper in his hand. 'Abigail,' he said, 'I've made my will. I fooled them lawyers and I wrote it myself.'" "How long ago was that?" Nancy asked quickly. "Let me see." Abigail frowned thoughtfully. "No, I can't remember the exact date. It was about the time Josiah went to live with Richard and Cora. Well, to go on with what I was saying, when Josiah showed me the will, he seemed mighty tickled about it. Mind, he didn't show me what was inside, but he hinted that he'd done well by me. 'But Josiah,' I said to him, 'are you sure it's legal to write it yourself?' 'Of course it is,' he said to me. 'A lawyer told me it was all right just so long as I had it witnessed.'" "Do you know who witnessed the will?" Nancy broke in. "No, I didn't ask him, and he didn't say." "So we've also got Richard and Cora. That's the Tophams. So I wonder if he took it with him when he went there." "He just went out of the room chuckling in that funny way he had." "Haven't you any idea what became of the will?" Nancy asked hopefully. "I reckon he hid it somewhere. That would be like Josiah. But I remember he did say something about putting it where nobody can get it unless they have legal authority." Unless they have legal authority. That's an odd one. "So I don't know what became of it. For all I know, he may have turned it over to a lawyer." "Are you certain that was all he said?" Nancy inquired gently. She knew that Abigail had grown rather childish and that her memory was failing. Alzheimer's. Early Alzheimer's, maybe, or just aging. It's not uncommon for older people to a certain extent regress back into living in memories of older times. And that's sometimes why they appear to be more childlike. It seems to me he did say something about what he was going to do with that will, but I just can't just recollect. shook her head and sighed. Many a night I've laid awake trying to think what it was. It seemed to Nancy that as victory was almost within her grasp, it had been snatched from her. Undoubtedly, Abigail Rowan had held the... Bowen? I thought it was Rowan. Yes, it is. One of them is a typo. Abigail Rowan held the secret of the Crowley will locked in her brain. I'm just going to write a little note there. Note. Maybe one day I will remember to submit that to wherever I got the book from. Faded page, this one. Undoubtedly, Abigail Rowan held the secret of the Crowley will locked in her brain, and it was equally likely that she would never be able to recall the vital information unless in some unusual way her memory was given a particular stimulus. So, yeah, something that reminds her. Try to think, Nancy begged. I can't remember, Abigail murmured hopelessly. I've tried and tried. She leaned against the cushions and closed her eyes as though the effort had exhausted her. At that very moment, the clock on the mantelpiece chimed 3. Abigail Rowan's eyes fluttered open, and an odd expression passed over her face. For an instant she stared straight before her, then slowly turned her head and fastened her eyes on the clock. Chapter 10. Abigail's Disclosure. When the mantel clock finished striking the hour of 3, Abigail Rowan's lips began to move. Nancy Drew leaned forward eagerly, fearful lest a single word escape her. She sensed that the striking of the clock, at a psychological moment, had started a train of thought. Coursing through the old woman's mind, and now she believed that an important disclosure was about to be made. The clock, Abigail whispered so softly that the words were scarcely audible. That's it. The clock. Josiah Crowley had a will and the will and a clock, Nancy prompted her. No, Abigail shook her head and sighed again. That wasn't it. I thought I had it, and then it slipped my mind. I seem to recollect that he said something about a clock, but that wasn't it. Abigail continued to stare at the timepiece, as did Nancy, who was at a loss to understand what connection it could have with the missing will. Suddenly a low cry came from the old woman. There, it came to me just like that, after all these years. Tell me, Nancy commanded quietly, for she feared that the knowledge might slip from the old lady before she could disclose it. A notebook, Abigail brought out triumphantly. It was something about a notebook. Tell me more about the notebook, Nancy urged gently. Although she could scarcely hide her eagerness, she forced herself to speak quietly, lest she excite Miss Bowen. Bowen, I don't know which one it is anymore. I remember it all now. Josiah wrote about the will in a little notebook of his. One day he said to me, Abigail, after I'm dead, if my will doesn't come to light, you can find out all about it in this little book of mine. What became of the notebook, Miss Bowen? I can't seem to recollect. He hid it someplace. So why did she talk about the clock? Again, Nancy Drew was baffled. Involuntarily, her eyes travelled to the mantel clock. She studied it critically. What connection could the clock have to do with the missing will, she asked herself. Certainly there must be one, for otherwise its striking would not have caused Abigail to think of the notebook. Nancy had studied psychology in school. Not your usual school subject. And was familiar with the power of suggestion and association. Now her keen mind jumped to the conclusion that a clock had something to do with the missing Crowley will. Could it be that the notebook had been hidden in the clock? Impulsively, Nancy got up and went over to the mantel. She took down the clock and looked inside. She saw nothing but a tiny key, which evidently was used to wind the timepiece. Disappointed, she returned to her chair. I'm going to guess she put the clock back. Doesn't tell us that. but they made a point of telling us that she took the book down. We'll see. Where was Josiah Crowley living at the time he told you about the notebook? She asked the old lady. He was living in his own house then, but he was just getting ready to go to the Tophams. He'd been visiting around with his various kin and letting his own house stay empty. After the Tophams asked him to live with them, he sold his home. What became of the household goods? Oh, the Tophams got most everything. There must have been a family clock, Nancy mused, half to herself. A family clock, Abigail repeated. Oh, yes, there was a clock. Can you describe it? Nancy questioned. Well, it was just an ordinary mantel clock, tall and with a square face, something like that one over there. The old lady pointed to the timepiece Nancy had just examined. Only Josiah's was more elaborate. It had a moon or something on top. What became of the clock? I don't know, Abigail responded indifferently. I suppose the Tophams got it. They took everything else. It was on the tip of Nancy's tongue to tell Abigail that Josiah Crowley might have hidden his will inside the family clock, but she hesitated to excite the old lady. After all, it was only a theory, and it would not be kind to encourage Abigail Bowen to believe there was a likelihood of gaining an inheritance unless it was a fact. I'll wait until I'm sure before I say anything about it to her, Nancy decided. She asked a number of other questions, but it was soon apparent that Abigail had told all that she could recall about the will. Although Nancy spoke of the family clock a number of times, its mention did not seem to interest the old lady. At last Nancy rose to depart, but before leaving she promised Abigail she would return in a few days to see how she was getting along. It was likewise her intention to stop at the nearest house to ask a neighbour woman to look after the old lady during her absence, but she said nothing of this, as she knew that Abigail would protest. After attending to the mission, she sprang into her roadster and started for River Heights. Attending to the mission, going next door and asking the neighbour to do that. But we've heard she's not going to tell Abigail she's doing that. After attending to that, she sprang into her roadster and started for River Heights. Nancy Drew was highly elated at the information she'd gleaned and was now more interested in the case than ever. I'll not tell the Horner girls what I've learned, Nancy advised herself, at least not until I've learned more about the family clock. If nothing comes of my theory, Allie and Grace would only be disappointed. I'll not raise their hopes until I have something important to tell. As Nancy drove along the West Lake Road, she reviewed the facts of the Crowley case. Unquestionably, Josiah Crowley had made a second will. According to Abigail Rowan, he had secreted it in a safe place and had written its location in a little notebook. He had told Abigail where the notebook could be found in case of his death, and with the passing years the knowledge had slipped away from the old lady. It's my opinion that Josiah Crowley hid the notebook in the family clock, Nancy reasoned. Otherwise, why would Abigail have said anything about it? Nancy was at a loss to know how to proceed. She knew that her next step in unravelling the mystery was to search the Crowley clock, but this would not be easy to accomplish. If, as Abigail had indicated, the clock had fallen into the hands of the Tophams, the task might be an impossible one. Then, too, it was not at all unlikely that the Tophams had already discovered the notebook. In that case, they would have destroyed it, Nancy told herself. Still, from the conversation I overheard in the park, I feel reasonably certain the notebook has never been found. No, if Josiah Crowley ever hid it in the clock, it must still be there, and it's up to me to get hold of it. During the long ride to River Heights, Nancy Drew mulled over the perplexing problem, but try as she would, she could think of no way to get her hands on the old clock. She must find some means of gaining entrance to the Topham residence. She's going to steal a clock. I can't very well climb through a window, much as I'd like to," she laughed, "and if I pay a social call upon the Tophams, they're sure to be suspicious. We haven't been friendly for years, and since Ada and Isabel discovered that I have taken an interest in the Horner girls, they would be certain to question my motive in going to their house. No, I must think of a good excuse." Presently Nancy reached River Heights. She drove the roadster down the boulevard and stopped in front of her home. As she stepped out and was preparing to go into the house, she heard her name called. Wheeling about, she saw a girl running toward her. It was one of Nancy's chums, Helen Corning. "Hello, Nancy," Helen called. "I haven't seen you for days. Where do you keep yourself?" Nancy laughed as she greeted her chum. "Oh, I've been especially busy lately. Come into the house and we'll have a chat." "Oh, I can't, Nancy. I wouldn't be up this way, but I'm trying to sell tickets for a charity dance." "How many have you sold?" "I have 6 left," Helen sighed. "It's a thankless job." "I'll take 2 if that will help you out," Nancy offered. "Will it help me? Say, if I ever get rid of these tickets, I'm going to dance a hornpipe. But if I don't sell them this afternoon, it's going to fix it so I can't start for Moon Lake. I wish I'd never promised to sell the things." "Moon Lake?" Nancy asked in surprise. "Yes, I'm going to a girls' camp there. I had planned to leave tonight, but unless I get rid of these tickets, I don't see how I can. I wish you were going with me to Moon Lake, Nancy." "So do I, Helen." "Why don't you come along then?" "Oh, I can't," Nancy protested. "I'm involved in something important and I can't get away. I'd love to go, though, really I would." "Well, if you can make it later, just hop into your roadster and come along. I'll be there for 2 weeks, that is, if I ever get rid of these charity tickets. I can't leave until I've sold them. I'd pay for them out of my allowance, only I've spent it already." "You are in difficulties," Nancy laughed. She reached in her purse. "How much are the tickets, Helen?" $2 each. How many will you take?" "Oh, give me 2. As Helen extended the tickets, a sudden thought struck Nancy Drew. A pleased light broke over her face. "I have an idea, Helen. I'll sell all of your tickets for you. How will that suit you?" "You're not joking?" "Never was more serious in my life." "Then the tickets are yours. But let me warn you, it won't be easy to sell them." "I'll enjoy trying it." "Well, I must say you have odd ideas of fun," Helen commented dryly, "but I'll not argue with you. This'll be fine for me. Now I'll be able to start for camp this afternoon. Here are the tickets." She handed them over with evident pleasure. "Good luck to you, Nancy. You'll need it." After Helen Corning had gone on down the street, Nancy Drew walked slowly toward the house. She regarded the charity tickets meditatively and chuckled softly to herself. That's once when I've killed 2 birds with 1 stone. These tickets will serve as my passport to the impregnable Topham Fortress." And that's the end of the chapter. So she's going to attempt to sell the dance tickets to the Topham girls. Maybe that's how she's going to get into the house. I need to have a drink and catch my breath. Right. And some water. You need water too. So drink up. Right. I think that's it. I don't think I've got anything else I need to do at the moment. So here we go. Chapter 11. Visiting the Tophams. It was nearly 3 o'clock of the following afternoon when Nancy Drew paused in front of the Topham residence on Highland Boulevard. She surveyed the structure with distaste. The house was a large, pretentious affair of nondescript type. It was set back from the street and seemed to look down rather aloofly upon the surrounding houses. Even a casual glance at the lawn revealed that it had been landscaped with a vengeance. Yes, they used quotation marks. In an effort to do it in proper style, Mrs. Topham had crowded the yard with sundials, benches, birdhouses and statues. Such a lack of taste, Nancy thought, as she walked up the path to the house. She lifted the knocker on the front door. Nancy realised that the interview was apt to be an unpleasant one, and she braced herself for the ordeal. I must be diplomatic, she advised herself, or I'll not learn a thing about that clock. If they suspect what I'm about, they may bounce me out on my ear. At that moment, a uniformed butler opened the door and condescendingly waited for Nancy to state her mission. "Tell Mrs. Topham that Miss Drew is calling," she directed. "I'm selling tickets for the charity dance. It's one of the most important social functions of the year. I am sure Mrs. Topham shall wish to attend." Nancy was forced to wait until the butler returned, with permission for her to enter. As she was finally ushered into the living room, she could not help but smile at the elaborate formality, for in spite of Mrs. Topham's lofty ambitions, the woman had never achieved the commanding position in society that she strove for. The room in which Nancy found herself was even more bizarre than she had anticipated. Expensive oriental rugs clashed with window draperies of a different hue. The walls were heavy with paintings which were entirely out of place in such a small room, and period furniture had been added indiscriminately. But Nancy Drew was not interested in Mrs. Topham's lack of taste. As soon as the butler had left her alone, she hastily glanced about. Almost at once her eye fastened upon a mantel clock, which rested above the fireplace. I wonder if that can be the Crowley clock. She rather doubted it, for the clock was too modern in appearance. She would have crossed the room to examine it, but a sound in the hall caused her to hesitate. As she heard someone coming, she sank down on an uncomfortable ladder-back chair and assumed an expression of composure. Mrs. Topham sailed grandly into the room, and after surveying her for a minute, took a seat opposite Nancy. "Well," she demanded coldly, "what is it?" "I am selling tickets for the—" "I don't want them," Mrs. Topham broke in rudely. "I can't be handing out my money to every peddler that comes along." "Mrs. Topham, I am not a peddler," Nancy said cuttingly, as the colour mounted to her cheeks. With difficulty she kept her temper in check. "Perhaps you didn't understand my name. I am Nancy Drew." "Oh." A slight change came over Mrs. Topham's face, for she was fully aware that Carson Drew and his daughter were cordially welcomed in River Heights homes which merely tolerated the Tophams, or, in a few cases, barred them. "I didn't catch the name, Miss Drew. What is it you're selling?" "Tickets for the charity dance." "Well, I hardly know what to say." Mrs. Topham hedged. It was apparent she was afraid to offend Nancy, and yet she was unwilling to part with the money. Although the Tophams were well-to-do, it was common knowledge that Mrs. Topham was decidedly stingy where other persons were concerned. "How much are the tickets?" $2 each. "Why, that's positively exorbitant," said Mrs. Topham, protesting. "But we are selling the tickets for charity," Nancy explained. "I assure you the cause is an excellent one." Before Mrs. Topham could reply, the front door opened and Isabel and Ada entered the house. Unaware of the visitor, they paused in the hall and carried on a disgruntled conversation. Evidently they had been making social calls and were angry because some woman had refused to see them. "Her maid said that she wasn't at home, but I know she was," Nancy heard Ada complain. The two sisters entered the living room, and when they saw Nancy, stopped short and stared rudely at her. They did not speak a word of greeting. "Miss Drew is selling tickets to a dance," Mrs. Topham informed her stepdaughters. "Don't buy them," Ada advised harshly. She had not forgotten the scene in the department store, and longed to avenge herself upon Nancy, whom she considered responsible for her humiliation. "But Ada," Mrs. Topham protested feebly. Yeah, definitely Cinderella vibes. "I thought it might help our social standing to take a few tickets." "Don't be silly, Mother. You'll only waste your money. We don't want to go anyway." "All right, I won't buy the tickets. Good afternoon." "Good afternoon, Miss Drew." Reluctantly, Nancy arose. She was somewhat taken aback at the unceremonious dismissal, for she had not accomplished the real purpose of her visit. As she turned, Nancy saw that Richard Topham blocked the door. He had entered so quietly that his arrival had been unobserved. We probably need to stay aware that he moves silently. Just a minute, Miss Drew, he said. How many tickets have you there? 4, Nancy gasped in surprise. I'll take them all. With a grand gesture, Richard Topham opened his pocketbook and carelessly pulled out a $20 bill. Keep the change, he ordered with assumed indifference. Give it to the charity. Richard, his wife gazed at him with disapproval. Have you lost your mind? A $20 bill? She whispered. It's you who can't see beyond your nose, Mr. Topham retorted, but in a low voice. You're always trying to get into society and then you pass up a real opportunity. This donation will get our names into the paper. He slumped into the nearest chair and, opening the afternoon paper, buried himself in the stock page. Mrs. Topham knew that the matter was closed, for she scarcely dared speak to her husband when he was absorbed in the market reports. Nancy, too, realised that she had no excuse to prolong her stay. I really must be going, she said quietly. What time is it anyway? There's a clock in front of you, Isabel said to her pointedly. Why, so there is, Nancy returned pleasantly. She glanced at the timepiece as though she had never seen it before. Oh, surely that can't be the old Crowley clock. I'm so interested in heirlooms. I should say not. That's far more expensive clock than the one Josiah Crowley left us, Mrs. Topham informed her caller condescendingly. Indeed? But I suppose you still have the family clock stored away in your attic. It's so hard to part with heirlooms. Cleverly, Nancy led Mrs. Topham to further disclosures. It wasn't hard to part with that old-fashioned thing, Mrs. Topham returned. We didn't want it cluttering up the attic. Isabel added, Crowley left so much old junk. We considered the clock entirely out of place in our modern home, Mrs. Topham continued, so we sent it up to our bungalow on Moon Lake. Unwittingly, Mrs. Topham had given Nancy the information which she sought. The purpose of her visit accomplished, the girl politely thanked the Tophams for the purchase of the charity tickets and took her leave. As she walked down the path to the street, she chuckled softly to herself. The Tophams may be old schemers, but this time they weren't so clever. Unless I am mistaken, those tickets will prove the most expensive ones they ever bought. Before they get through, it may cost them the Crowley fortune. Ooh. We're going to go for chapter 12. Although following a clue, that's what it's called, Chapter 12, Following a Clue. Although highly elated at what she'd learned from the Tophams, Nancy Drew was at a loss to know how to proceed. Now, Moon Lake is where that camp is that her friend was going to. What was her markup? How much was she making? I don't know. I don't know if any of these places... if any of these place names equate to anything else. It'd be very interesting to find out. Nancy Drew was at a loss to know how to proceed. Undoubtedly, the old Crowley clock was set up in the bungalow at Moon Lake, but to get there was another matter. She's forgotten, hasn't she? Nancy was determined to profit by the information, but was confronted with a number of serious problems. Moon Lake was located among the hills 40 miles away, and the roads were not of the best. Nancy did not know the exact location of the Topham cottage. The river was accurate. What was this one? Moon Lake? Did not know the exact location of the Topham cottage. Then, too, she needed an excuse for making the long trip. So if the Tophams learn I've gone to Moon Lake, they may become suspicious, she counselled herself. I must think of some excuse to broadcast as a smokescreen. She's forgotten. We have a Moon Lake in our province. Oh, that's neat. That's cool. It won't be that one, though. But we all know that. Yeah. But try as she would, Nancy could think of nothing. She took a certain amount of pride in her detective work, and now she felt she had struck a valuable clue. She did not wish to ask advice from her father. She preferred to solve the mystery herself and then surprise him with the solution. At dinner that night, Nancy was unusually silent. Carson Drew commented on her preoccupation. "It seems to me you've been looking troubled lately," he observed. "Do you feel well?" "Never felt better in my life," Nancy laughed. "Just the same, I believe you need a vacation. I really realise it isn't easy for a girl your age to look after a big house like this. After a time, the responsibility gets to be wearing." She's been bouncing around Canada so far. I wonder if the original author had Canadian connections or was based from Canada and used a whole lot of place names that were familiar to them. "After a time, the responsibility gets to be wearing." "How stupid of me!" Nancy exclaimed. In her excitement, she permitted a fork to fall from her hand and clatter against the plate. "Oh dear, we do not do this back then." Carson Drew, who did not comprehend what was passing through his daughter's mind, looked at her in surprise. "Stupid?" he inquired. "Oh, I mean, it was strange. I didn't think of Helen Corning before this," Nancy said hastily. "Helen is going to a girls' camp at Moon Lake. I'm dying to go to Moon Lake. May I start the first thing in the morning? I know I can get in. They have room for half a dozen more girls," Helen said. "I think it would be an excellent idea, Nancy. A nice rest will do wonders." Since when did youth camps become restful, especially when they're at locations like a lake? Oh, maybe it was Canada is a mystical place no Americans know of. I bet this will age fine. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there was that sort of thing going on. "I think it would be an excellent idea, Nancy. A nice rest will do wonders for you. Go by all means." Nancy Drew was delighted that she had stumbled upon an excuse which would make it appear natural for her to go to Moon Lake. Early the next morning, after packing a suitcase, she started off in the roadster. As it was not out of her way to go by River Road, she decided to stop at the Horners and give Grace the dress goods she had promised her, the fabric and thread and stuff. As she drove in at the gate, one glance told Nancy that something was wrong. She saw a number of dead chickens in the barnyard, and as the Horner girls came toward her from the direction of the hen house, it was evident that Allie had been crying. "What is the matter?" Nancy asked quickly. "Oh, it's my chickens, Nancy. They're all dying. I can't understand it. This morning when I went to feed them, I found 10 dead. I'm so discouraged." "And yesterday a fox took 2, Grace added. "I guess fate is against us." "I'm afraid I'll lose all of my chickens before I get through," Allie declared unhappily. "I don't know what is killing them. They seem to have a strange disease." "Allie is all broken up," Grace said quietly. "She's worked so hard with her chickens. Most of them are pets. And then we need the money so badly. Now that dressmaking has fallen off, the chicken money is our only means of support. Please won't you let me help?" Nancy begged, reaching for her pocketbook. "Accept a little loan to tide you over." Grace shook her head firmly. "Thank you for your kindness, Nancy, but we can't take your money. We'll manage somehow." "If only Uncle Josiah had provided for us," Allie sighed. "You haven't learned anything more about the second will, Nancy?" "I haven't anything definite to report," Nancy replied, evading the question. She did not wish to raise false hope, and she thought it best not to tell of her discovery. "But I'm still hoping we'll be able to trace the will." "I doubt it," Grace commented pessimistically. "I'm on my way to Moon Lake now," Nancy told the girls. "I stopped here to deliver the dress goods." She handed a package to Grace. "The pattern is inside and I'm easy to fit, so you'll have no trouble." Grace's face brightened as she accepted the bundle. "Oh, Nancy, I can't thank you." "It is I who should thank you," Nancy laughed. "And now let me pay for the dress in advance." Again, Grace stubbornly shook her head. Not until the work is finished. That isn't good business. Nancy saw that Grace and Allie were too proud to accept help and regretfully abandoned the idea of trying to give them money. I'll come back in a few days for a fitting, she promised as she prepared to drive away. Nancy's talk with the Horner girls had left her rather depressed, for she realised that in spite of their pride, Allie and Grace would soon be forced to accept charity. Oh, if only she could help them. And poor old Abigail, Nancy thought, if Josiah Crowley had used a grain of sense, things wouldn't be in such a muddle. Nancy soon branched off from the river road and headed south toward Moon Lake. South, okay. The highway was little travelled, and it was necessary for her to devote all of her attention to driving. The road had not been dragged after a recent rain, and the ruts were deep. Oh, yeah, in the old days when you had a clay-based road and there were ruts in it from wet weather, they would drag something heavy across the surface to break the ruts down, break the bumps that were alongside the ruts down to fill in the ruts, just to even it up a bit. That's probably what they mean by dragging. Jagged rocks and stones were scattered in the path, and it seemed to Nancy that the hills went straight up and straight down. Presently she noticed that the roadster had taken a strange notion to turn to the left of the road in spite of her efforts to keep in the middle. Not without foreboding of trouble, she stopped the car and got out to make a tour of inspection. As she had suspected, a rear tyre was flat. "A puncture," Nancy murmured in disgust. "If that isn't just my luck." "Oh, well, I suppose I must fix it myself, because there won't be another car along for an hour on this road." It was not the first time Nancy Drew had changed a tyre, but she never relished the task. Rummaging under the seat, she pulled out the tools and quickly jacked up the rear axle. She loosened the lugs which held the tyre in place and tugged at it. Again and again she pulled, but the huge balloon tyre could not be budged. Then as she gave one mighty tug, it came off, and Nancy Drew fell backwards into a sitting posture in the road. "Well, it's off anyway," she told herself with satisfaction as she brushed the dirt from her clothing. It required but a few minutes to put on the spare tyre and fasten the old one onto the rear of the car. Then, in relief, Nancy started on her way again, but the accident had delayed her nearly an hour. It was after 12 o'clock when at last she came within sight of Camp Avondale, where Helen Corning was staying. Through the tall trees she caught a glimpse of a long row of shacks and saw the smoke rising from the cookhouse. Beyond, the blue lake sparkled and glimmered in the sunlight. As Nancy drove into the camp, a group of girls gathered about the roadster. Helen Corning came running out of a cabin to greet her chum. Canada of the 30s would have been mystical. Only Americans from big cities would have travelled to it on purpose, so it would have seemed so different and strange. Farmer and miner types wouldn't have been so impressed. Such an unknown place, even though it's only across the border. "Girls, it's Nancy Drew," she exclaimed enthusiastically. "Now the fun'll start. Park your car over there back of the cookhouse," behind the cookhouse. "Nancy, am I too late for dinner?" Nancy demanded. "I'm nearly starved." "You're just in time," Helen assured her. "Oh, Nancy, I'm so glad you came." "So am I. How long can you stay?" "Oh, I don't know. Until you get tired of me, probably." "Then you'll stay for the rest of the summer," Helen laughed. Nancy was escorted to the main building of the camp, where she met the lady in charge and registered. "She's to stay with me," said Helen, and so it was arranged. When the girls walked off, Nancy told Helen about selling the charity dance tickets and gave her the money paid by Mr. Topham. "He surely was generous," said Helen in surprise. "He did it just to show off," declared Nancy. "I'm positive of it." Nancy scarcely had time to deposit her suitcase under her cot and freshen up a bit from her long ride when dinner was called. The food was plain but substantial, and already she discovered that she had developed an enormous appetite. She hasn't been out in the country long, and she's suddenly really hungry. Dinner over, she was rushed from one thing to another. I always thought they're on the coast near Boston. I had thought so too. But there was an inference that Illinois was involved somehow. in the early books, so I really don't know. I did mention something about 2 possibilities. Like there's an inference of Maine and there's another one of Illinois. So I don't know. But having a lot of Canadian place names in could well be either that the author or the person who wrote up the original plot notes had some Canadian connection and used that for inspiration. Because we know they sometimes do that. My nose is itchy, the end of it. And it's not from the cat. I don't know why. Can you make sure that Theo goes outside for a bit? Yeah. Thanks. And not on the deck.
You what, sorry?
Not on the deck because I think the gate's still shut.
No, it's open.
Oh, that's right. Before I shut him in again, I want him to wander around out in the grass and stuff. Do cat business. He just went meow. Dinner over, she was rushed from one thing to another. The girls insisted that Nancy join them in a hike. She returned to camp with a desire for a good rest, but Helen Corning had other plans. We're all going for a ride in the launch before supper, she declared. Don't you ever rest here? Nancy groaned. Oh yes, at night. This is your first day here. You'll be used to it in a day or so. Either that or I'll be a wreck. But you don't want to miss the launch ride, Nancy. You'll have a splendid opportunity to see all the summer cottages on Moon Lake. Summer cottages? Nancy asked quickly. Instantly she thought of the Topham bungalow and wondered where it was located. Undoubtedly, the launch ride would give her the opportunity to find out. You'll go, won't you? Helen begged. You can rest after supper. Yes, I'll go, Nancy promised. You couldn't keep me here. Though she was tired, she was really enjoying herself immensely. 6 girls loaded themselves into the launch and someone started the motor. It's always a relief when the engine starts, Helen explained. Every so often it balks. As the little launch turned out into the lake, it seemed to Nancy that she'd never seen a more beautiful sight. The sun, which appeared to be sinking down into the water, resembled a great ball of fire, yet she did not forget the real purpose of the trip. The Tophams have a bungalow up here, haven't they? She questioned. Yes, it's across the lake from here. We'll come to it presently. The Tophams aren't there now? Oh no, the cottage is closed. There's a Negro caretaker who looks after it. They call him Jeff Tucker. Is it hard to get to the place? Oh, not if you go by launch, but it's a long way if you take the road around the lake. I didn't know you were particularly interested in the Tophams, Nancy. Oh, they're no friends of mine, Nancy returned hastily. I was merely curious. After a time, as the launch chugged along close to the shore, Helen waved her hand toward a bungalow which was set back some distance from the water. The Tophams own that one, she informed her chum. Eagerly, Nancy turned her head and looked. She told herself she would remember the location. We're going to have a wonderful time here together, Helen chattered happily on. Next week there's going to be a big dance too. Oh, there's so much of interest at Moon Lake, Nancy. You'll stay, won't you? Involuntarily, Nancy's eyes swept the shore and came to rest on the Topham bungalow. You're right, Helen, she agreed heartily. There are a number of interesting things here. Yes, if you want me to, I'll stay. Chapter 13. Let's see how many chapters there are in this book. It goes up to 25. There you go. Resume. So we're just... Chapter 13, we're just over halfway. An adventure. Nancy Drew had made up her mind to visit the Topham cottage the very next day, but in making her plans she had counted without Helen Corning and her friends. Yeah, I'm not surprised. They were unwilling that she should be alone even for a minute. From the moment she awoke in the morning and sniffed the fragrant odour of the pines, she was rushed from one thing to another. After a breakfast of fruit, fried eggs, crisp bacon, and hot cornbread, she was pressed into a tennis game. The afternoon was devoted to swimming and water polo. By evening, Nancy Drew was so tired she could scarcely keep her eyes open, and she was thankful for the opportunity of tumbling into bed. Now, I'm just going to own up that, as far as I know, I have no idea if I've ever eaten cornbread. I don't think I have. So, yeah, I should probably look it up and try cooking it sometime.
Only have in games.
PJ says he only has in games. Yeah.
There's no.
Tomorrow I simply must find a way to visit the Topham cottage, she told herself just before she dropped off to sleep. Immediately after breakfast the following morning, Helen Corning announced the plan for the day. "The girls have decided on an all-day hike into the woods, Nancy. You'll go, won't you?" Nancy groaned. "You're wearing me to a frazzle, Helen. Please let me off this time. I'd like to stay in camp today and just rest up." Remember, her dad said she needed rest. "Well, all right," Helen agreed unwillingly. "I'll stay with you." "Oh, no," Nancy protested vigorously. "I won't let you do that. You like to hike so well. Please go on. I'll have a good time all by myself. Really, I will." "I don't like to leave you, Nancy, but if you insist." "I do, Helen. Please don't worry about me. I'll have a good time here. If you don't mind, I may take the launch out while you're gone." "If you do, you better not go far," Helen advised her. "We girls bought it second-hand for a song, and it's my private opinion that the engine isn't much good." "I'll be careful," Nancy promised. She could scarcely hide her eagerness to be off, but she was forced to wait until Helen and her friends had started out on their bikes. No, on their hike. It seemed to Nancy that they would never leave, but at last they trudged away with their knapsacks slung over their shoulders. "Well, you'll wish you'd gone too," Helen called back over her shoulder. As soon as the girls were out of sight, Nancy hurried down to the launch, which was tied to the dock, not far from the camp. "I think I would have waited slightly longer, because if they're tramping or hiking, they're going to hear her taking off on the boat." Oh my goodness. Hardy Boys Bay, I think, was the bit near Boston. With their island related stuff. Yes, they were. I hope they reboot Nancy Drew as a TV show. The one that's out was a horror show for some reason, with actual afterlife stuff for some reason. That is weird. Nancy Drew's nothing like that sort of thing. And yeah, if anyone has actually read any of the Nancy Drew books, I'd be really interested if, while we're reading these, if you find that the stories are not just memory-wise different, because that's quite common if you hear a story or read a story when you're a kid compared with an adult, but if you are now concluding that the one that you read when you were younger was actually one of the newer editions, which were, some of them were quite different stories, even though they had the same titles. Thank you, Harriet Stratemeyer. Where do we get to? As soon as the girls were out of sight, Nancy hurried down to the launch, which was tied to the dock not far from the camp. Oh my goodness, I had to stop at the first ghost demon jump scare. Yeah, not what you're expecting. Nancy Drew Girl Detective is what it's meant to be, not Nancy Drew Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Yeah. Hurried down to the launch, which was tied to the dock not far from the camp. She examined the engine. She had frequently handled motorboats, but never one of this particular make. "I believe I can manage it all right, if only I could get the engine started," Nancy told herself. She discovered a pin sunk in the rim of a flywheel, and after adjusting other parts, pulled it out rather timidly. She gave the wheel a vigorous turn to the right. She tried again, swinging it further and snapping back hard. To her delight, the engine began to roar. Cutting down the motor, throttling it back, Nancy steered out into deep water. At first she followed the shore, but as she became more familiar with the wheel, and as the engine appeared to work perfectly, she headed out into the lake. Nobody's checked how much fuel we have. Nancy experienced a real thrill as the little launch responded to her hand. The lake was as smooth as glass and there was scarcely a cloud in the sky. As the launch cut through the water, a tiny spray blew in Nancy's face, but she did not mind. Far ahead she could see the opposite shore, and she headed straight for the point where she knew the Topham bungalow was located. If only the caretaker will let me in when I get there, she thought, as she drew near her objective point. But she was doomed never to reach the opposite shore that day, for unexpectedly there was a miss in the steady throb of the engine. The motor gave one long, slow wheeze and died. "Oh, what can have happened to it now?" Nancy cried anxiously. "I can't have run out of gasoline." An examination of the tank revealed that it was nearly full. Nancy studied the engine doubtfully. Like most girls, she had never interested herself in the mechanics of what made wheels go round. "Hateful thing," she murmured. "I believe it stopped on purpose." Too late, Nancy recalled that her chum had warned her about the engine. Now, as she glanced toward the shore, she saw no hope of rescue. She was within sight of the Topham bungalow, which appeared deserted, but miles from her own camp. For nearly an hour she worked over the engine, but her efforts were useless. The stubborn motor refused to start. "I'll have to sit out here all day," Nancy thought miserably. "This means I won't get to visit the Topham cottage after all." It was especially tantalizing to be so close to the bungalow and yet know that she could not reach it. Nancy was tempted to swim, but she gave up the idea almost as quickly as it occurred to her, for she realized that even if she reached the bungalow, she would have no means of returning to camp. She decided that it would be better to remain on the lake and wait for a passing boat to rescue her. Slowly the hours dragged on and the launch drifted further and further from the shore. Never had time seemed to pass so monotonously. "There's one thing certain," Nancy Drew told herself. "If I ever get out of this launch, I'll never set foot in it again." The camp boat seemed to be the only one on the lake, and as the day wore on, she began to wonder if she ever would be rescued. The sun beat down upon her, and with the passing hours, she became hungry as well as uncomfortable. Technically, she should be getting sunburnt around about now. "After today, I'll never have another chance to visit the Topham bungalow alone," whistle or flare. Whistle or flare, yeah, that would be a good idea. There should be safety gear like that on the boat, but it probably isn't. Yeah, both even. "Helen means well, but she'll stay with me every minute. I think the best I can do is to tell her I'm starting for home tomorrow. That is, if I'm ever lucky enough to reach shore. On my way back to River Heights, I'll stop at the Topham cottage. Helen will be disappointed, but it can't be helped." For want of other occupation, Nancy turned her attention again to the engine. When the sun sank into the water several hours later, she was still bending over it, a determined look in her eyes. "There," she muttered as she straightened up. "I've certainly done enough to it. If it won't go now, it never will." She gave the wheel a vicious swing, and to her, that's the flywheel, like when you're starting a lawnmower and you pull the cord. And to her astonishment, the engine began its steady roar, as unconcerned as though it had never stopped. "Well, if that isn't the limit," Nancy exclaimed in wonder. Hopefully she glanced. Also paddles, yes, they should have them. All of those things, especially if you know that the engine doesn't work well, there should always be paddles in a boat. Hopefully she glanced toward the shore, but already shadows were beginning to lurk among the trees, and she knew that in less than an hour it would be dark. "It's too late to visit the bungalow tonight," she decided regretfully. "I'd better get back to camp before this engine changes its mind again." Obedient to her will, the little launch ploughed through the water toward camp, its engine labouring faithfully. As she eased up to the dock, Nancy saw Helen and her friends just trudging into camp. They hailed her with delight. "I'm nearly dead," Helen announced. "You were smart to stay in camp, Nancy." She stopped abruptly as she stared at her chum. "Why, you're all sunburned and you're covered with grease. What have you been doing?" "Taking a sun bath," Nancy laughed. "By the way, Helen, you're right about that engine, but I don't think it will give you any more trouble this summer. Anyway, I've donated 8 hours to the cause, so technically she's actually fixed the engine." 8 hours? Helen gasped. You've not been out on the lake all that time? Served me right, I guess. I should have gone on the hike. But while Nancy made light of her adventure, she was disappointed. She had wasted a day and time was precious. Would she ever reach the Topham bungalow? So far she'd been thwarted at every turn. And that's it for today. I will leave you with a teaser though. Chapter 14 is called An Exciting Discovery. Ooh. So how's she going to do it? Oh my goodness. Yes, I know you've got an ad break, so I won't say goodbye until after the ad break's finished. Itchy nose. Anyway, nearly there. I'm hearing a vehicle. I really don't know what it is. Right. No, not a helicopter this time. It was it sounded like a car door or a van boot shutting or something like that. Might be that hubby's back. He's been away for a few days. In which case he's probably brought a bunch of wood from up north to use for his woodworking. So I don't know. I better get off and go and find out if it is him or not. Anyway, so thank you so much, everybody, for being here. As I said, but it was probably in the middle of an ad break. Next time we will start with chapter 14, which is called An Exciting Discovery. I shall take care. You guys do too. Make sure you stay